What's up, guys? You're listening to a July 12th edition of the Splash Tag Podcast. I'm once again joined by Jason, who was my guest last week. And last week we did a redraft and discussion of the 2011 NBA draft. And so right when we finished recording that, we kind of talked and we said, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and also do the 2012 draft, because we're still waiting for the NBA to kind of get with the bubble to actually get going. And on top of that, we found that the actual kind of redraft process was a fun and interesting thought exercise and a discussion. So if you haven't listened to that, I'm going to put a link below in the description. But I highly encourage you to listen to that because it was a really interesting conversation. So without further ado, I'm joined by Jason. How you doing, dude?
What up, Matt? It's about 20 days away from the bubble. Pretty excited. The videos are already coming in from players that are already in the bubble, and I think it's in the honeymoon phase in terms of everything's new and exciting. But I can already tell probably in a week they'll be pretty tired of staying at the same place for that long with each other. So
yeah,
really a test of how good team chemistry is.
Yeah, it's already interesting seeing some of the pictures, videos, tweets from various players, as well as the individual team accounts. I saw that Redick is I think he's gonna shotgun. I think it's a Bud Light because he was bored and his tweet got 10,000 retweets. So that's apparently happening today at some point. If you haven't seen that by the time you listen to this, maybe you might want to check that out. Yeah, just definitely some interesting content, and obviously there's the games coming in what 2-3 weeks ish, and so I'm just curious to see, like, will there be any drama, potential spikes, or like, I guess is it potential the coronavirus could enter the bubble before games even begin, and if so, like, how quickly can the NBA take action and make sure that it doesn't delay anything? So definitely, obviously a unique situation to monitor.
Wait, hang on. You say JJ Redick was shotgunning a beer?
Yeah. So basically, the context is he was at the water fountain at this hotel, and then it said there was like a sign that said, "For your own safety, do not drink this water." It's like it was like down temporarily, and then next to the water fountain was like an open Bud Light. So then he took a picture and he said, well, at least I have an option B. And then, like, someone replied and said, hey, will you like shotgun a beer? And he said, you know what, if this gets 10,000 retweets by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, I'll shotgun a beer, or like a Bud Light live.
Isn't he like plus 30 now? Like, at what age do you think it's not socially acceptable to be shotgunning beers? Like, where's the cap here?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get like in trouble here, but I've seen like 50-year-olds like shotgunning beers.
Oh man,
shout
out to them.
I mean, I think it's, generally speaking, when I've seen that, it's in like a football. It's like at a tailgate, like for a football game. So it's like that type of context. But
I'll put it this way. I think it's no longer cool if you're shotgunning in front of your kids. I think that's like when it's like the cutoff point of like, all right, like, let's hunt the brakes here and be an adult.
Okay, that's an interesting. Okay, I mean, I can get behind that rule. I have friends who have shotgun beers with their parents, but once again, it was like at a sporting event or like at a tailgate. True. But look at us. Last week we started off talking about Joey Chestnut and the hot dogs, and now we're talking about etiquette with shotgunning beers.
What a time to be alive, man.
I guess that's what staying at home does. But anyhow, to kind of keep it moving. So you and I were gonna do a redraft of the 2012 NBA draft, which similar deal as last week, where there's no definitive criteria. It's just kind of whatever you're feeling, as long as you can talk it out and have some interesting points. And once again, because you are a Rockets fan, I'm going to give you the pick the Rockets had, which originally they actually had the 14th pick, but then they traded up to get the 12th pick, which ironically was actually used for the Harden trade. So once again, you're going to be the evens, I'm going to be the odds. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So right off the bat, I have the first pick. I'm New Orleans. This was before they were the Pelicans, but I'm gonna take who they took in the original draft. So AD is still the pick here. There's like I'm curious if you agree or disagree. I think there's like a good case for Lillard because I actually think Lillard is Lillard is, I'd say, more accomplished as a player, although some of that is due to organizational infrastructure. But at the end of the day, the tiebreaker for me was actually the 2018 playoffs where the Blazers and the Pelicans faced off, and AD was like clearly the best player on the floor, and they swept the Blazers. Curious for what you think.
Yeah, I mean, no complaints here. I think this is one of those weird cases where the top pick actually is the best player from the draft. It's actually rare for that to happen. I think I would say less than 50% of the time. Really interesting to dive in kind of why Anthony Davis didn't really lead to great team success early in his career. Maybe it was because there just wasn't the right pieces around him. But I think if you're debating between Anthony Davis and Damian Lillard, I think Anthony Davis is just more of an all-round player.
Right.
Defensively, I think he makes up for a lot more than what Damian Lillard brings in
For sure.
as an offensive talent. So I think, end of the day, he's definitely the top pick. I think maybe there was a little bit of durability at the beginning of his career because he was just such a freak athlete that I think he had a couple of weird like leg injuries and things like that. So it always seemed like he never played a full season, whereas like Damian Lillard is just like straight Iron Man. But no complaints there in terms of the top pick.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like if I were picking today, I would still take AD, but I think there is something to be said or commended on Damian Lillard's part for the fact that he sets just such a good tone as a leader in the face of an organization, and that they're consistently competitive year in year out. There's years where they lose LaMarcus Aldridge, Nick Batum, Robin Lopez, Aaron Aflalo, and they don't even miss a beat. So to that, I think that was kind of what that made me at least have to think about Damian Lillard. But I agree with you, all around player or just kind of all around skill level. I feel like you got to go AD as well as he's got a quote unquote higher ceiling.
Yep.
Yeah.
So leading to the second pick, obvious choice there, Damian Lillard. Crazy kind of how his story is. Do you even know where Weber State is?
I do, but only because I like looked it up once upon a time.
Yeah, it's just so crazy how like these players just come from like random universities and they're coming up. Like you think about kind of some of the greats like CJ McCollum, Ja Morant, even recently, just like I guess these are usually guards that probably had a growth spurt going into college, and that's kind of how they developed up. But also probably I actually argue for a case with really awesome guards from smaller schools because they're used to taking on a higher workload, and if they really develop kind of the it factor in terms of they're the guy that everyone needs to depend on the team early in their career. So, but I mean, Damian Lillard, he's a total alpha, great superstar, face of the franchise. Like, you couldn't ask for anything else than from a franchise star here. So, easy second pick choice.
Yeah, can't argue with you. Can't argue with you on anything you said. And yeah, it's really interesting. I noticed last year when I was watching the conference finals, it was really interesting to see how many of the notable players on all the teams, like kind of like these Final Four teams remaining, how many of them either essentially just didn't play at traditional basketball powerhouses. So obviously you had Dame, CJ, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and then in the Eastern Conference, Kawhi went to San Diego State. Pascal Siakam went to New Mexico State. And then in Milwaukee, I mean, Brogdon and Bledsoe are both kind of power. I mean, Bledsoe definitely is, Kentucky being a blue blood. But I just found it interesting. Like, yes, during the college basketball season, you watch the best teams because, they're ranked high and they're quote unquote the favorites. But it's always really interesting to see that a lot of the names that kind of changed the course of NBA history, a lot of them don't come from these big schools.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, moving on to number 3, the Washington Wizards. our our hometown team. But once again, this is another pick where I think it stays this. It's the same player as it was in the draft. I'm gonna go with Bradley Beal. And Beal, though he has not made an All NBA team yet, I think that he's been snubbed from that. He's at least been in the conversation, and I think he's also been in a situation where I wouldn't say it's the worst possible situation because they have seen some success, but I also feel like that the situation combined with injury and the market that he's playing in, he doesn't get as much like hype and and I guess hype and attention from like casual fans. But at the end of the day, Bradley Beal is a guy who he's one of the purest shooters and scorers I've seen. He finishes it well. He shoots it well from mid range. He shoots it well from three, obviously. And it just kind of seems like you just give him the ball and he can get you a bucket. He can create his own offense, no matter how good the defense that he's going up against is. And on top of that, he's always been really efficient with it. And then at least this past year, the last few years, he's also been able to really show that he's a high level decision maker and playmaker. And so I'm gonna go Bradley Beal, even though there are other guys who I would say are more accomplished.
Yeah, I agree there. And he's still relatively young. I think he came into the draft pretty early.
Yep.
So, and I really like kind of how his ascension goes from year to year. He's improving constantly. And I think it really puts into perspective kind of, was this the perfect situation for him to develop too? Because maybe spending those couple years playing second fiddle to John Wall allowed him to really, gear out his defense, put his priority on defense, put his priority on playing off ball, improve his shooting, cutting. And now once John Wall went out, he started developing kind of his playmaking, lead guard type of skills. So, it puts into question, was this probably the best situation for him to develop? Maybe. Because I think if he was thrusted into kind of the starting, lead guy type of role early on to his career, maybe he didn't develop up his secondary stuff and maybe he couldn't handle the pressure early in his career. But really love to see kind of where he goes, whether or not he stays in DC or whether or not he moves to another team. But definitely a very, very solid third pick.
Yeah, and I guess when I mentioned situation, I just mean that I think that under Ernie Grunfeld, the Wizards weren't exactly the model organization in terms of decision making and chemistry, because you would always hear, not that all of it's true, but you would definitely see that there could be sometimes like underlying tension or team issues with team chemistry and whatnot. So I think that combined with some of the things I outlined, I think that was why Beal didn't necessarily get all the acclaim that maybe he should have based on what he was doing. But I agree with you that him playing next to John Wall was a great chance for him to not be thrust into like being the quote the guy, but also and work on things like playing off the ball and not always and not necessarily hunting for your own shot, things like that.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. So next up, you are the Cleveland Cavaliers. In the original draft, they took Dion Waiters fourth, which at the time was like a huge shock. This pick, I'm really curious to hear who you're gonna take.
Yeah, I was flip-flopping back and forth on two guys here, and I think at the end of the day, I settled on a guy that I think could have lead potential, whereas I think the other guy was more, will always be a secondary type guy. So I'm going Chris Middleton here. Crazy how he was drafted in the really late in the second round. So I guess it really took, he was a pretty raw prospect coming out, but I think he brings, everything you want in terms of shooting, in terms of scoring ability, playing defense. I think he found a perfect fit right now with him and Giannis. And I remember hearing stories of how both of them together developed by pushing each other, going really hard in practice. And that's really how they got set up. So, I'd be interested to see if you take out Giannis, if he goes down with injury, does Chris Middleton kind of step up and, take on more of the scoring, more of the playmaking, but very decent guy. Now he's a pretty solid 20-point scorer with really good defense, can get you a couple of assists, a couple of boards. So that's who I'm going with my number 4 pick. Surprisingly, picking a different shooting guard than Dion Waiters.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I had him 5th on my board, so I'm gonna assume that my 4 was your 5 and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of the prototypical NBA wing. I don't know if you want him being the guy, kind of like, but like you said, I think he's in a great situation right now, playing next to a guy like Giannis. And like you said, he's obviously like a good two-way player. When you look at his, he's always shot it well from from kind of all levels. And he's actually a really good free throw shooter. He's a career 87% free throw shooter. I'd be curious to see how frequently he goes to the line. But yeah, I don't have a huge gripe with that. You taking him at 4 because I had him 5th.
Yep, exactly. So again, I think we're pretty aligned here with number 5 here. If you want to jump to that.
Yeah, Draymond.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. He's probably not, if he's your number 1 guy, that's probably not the situation you want him in, which is ironic because, I mean, here, if we have him going 5th, he would be going to the Kings, who at the time had Cousins, Isaiah Thomas, and Tyreek Evans. We don't really know but we don't really know what to expect from Tyreek. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, Draymond, I think he's the ultimate Swiss Army knife guy in the NBA, where he does all the small stuff that isn't so glamorous. He's obviously a tremendous defensive player, having won the award. And the reason I had Draymond over Chris Middleton was because Draymond, with his 2015-16 season, like he literally he contributed to, obviously, like what you could consider like a changing of the way basketball is played. His 15-16 season is like really, really impressive when you look back at it. But like you said, not exactly a lot of lead dog potential necessarily. I do think that he's a great guy he does really set the tone for your team when you have him there. But yeah, I think Draymond's a pretty easy pick here.
Yeah, I think one thing that I knocked him off was, he was early, probably in 15-16, he was shooting like 38% from 3, which is very competent. But now, if you're looking at in recent years, it's really fallen off the cliff where, in the past 2 seasons, he's hitting below 30%.
Below 30,
he's really, like, now I would label him as he's not a good shooter, aka like leave him open for a reason.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jalen Rose. So I think that's where you kind of give him a knock there. But I mean, he's still contributing across the board in terms of, assists, rebounds. So he's really giving a bit of everything. But that could be a nod to kind of the system that they run in Golden State, where Draymond does have the responsibility of doing a bunch of everything. It's, again, another question of, did he land in probably the perfect situation for his NBA career? Like, if you took out Draymond Green from Golden State and put him here at number 5 at Sacramento, like, I'm sure he'll probably do very well, but do you think he'll have as big of the popularity and people point to him as an all-timer, as a great, if he was in a different situation?
Yeah, I agree with you. Right now, he's literally in like the perfect situation for him because he gets to play next to two of the greatest shooters ever. So I definitely agree with you there. And I think you brought up a good point. Like, in recent seasons, he hasn't particularly shot it well. But one thing I think that if he, let's say, were to go to another team, right, like say the Kings, one thing I will say that works in his favor is that he is a guy who always seems to be a quote unquote like winning player. Like, I always feel like he's better in the playoffs than he is in the regular season. And I always feel like when I watch him play, he makes the right plays, which is like, not something you can say for some guys who have really nice stat lines.
Yeah, but I mean, the reason why I put Chris Middleton above is just kind of, I feel like Chris Middleton is less dependent on his situation.
Sure.
I feel like anywhere he goes, he's definitely a very solid star hopefully you want him as your second star, but I think he could fill in as like a number one guy. Don't know if the team's success will be that good, but I still think he'll put up, crazy numbers, big numbers, similar to what you probably see with Bradley Beal, probably just with a couple minuses here and there. But that's why I had him above Draymond Green at number 4 instead of 5.
Yeah, I can't really. I think that's totally fair. Moving on to 6. This original pick was Damian Lillard, but he's already off the board. So who are you taking for the Blazers?
Yeah, I think another guy this is where kind of the cutoff is. After this guy is probably going to go downhill, but I'm going Andre Drummond. Big stat guy in terms of he's like basically 15 and crazy amount of rebounds. I think hasn't he led the league in rebounds a couple seasons?
Yeah, 3 seasons.
Yeah, so my only preface is I literally watched 0 games from him because he's been playing in Detroit, and I don't think other people would argue that they haven't seen too many Detroit games. I think he's marked by kind of his contract that he's received as a big minus, but I mean in terms of his playing, like very, very solid player, like can anchor your center position, swallow up boards. One thing I would give him a shout out is, if you got a big man that you draft and they shoot like, less than 50% from free throw, and they're like, well, it's too bad. That's just who he is. I would point him to watch the footage of Andre Drummond because he's actually improved his free throw percentage. Now he's at like about 60%, high 50s, which again, not great.
Not great, but
like, when he first came in the league, he was shooting like 30%, 35%, in his year 3 season.
Yeah.
Like I would just point at him and be like, all right, like, he can do it. Like you could too, right? So give him a shout out there. Really interested to see kind of what his career is going to go. He's now in Cleveland. Really would want to see how he does in terms of a winning team. But we shall see.
Yeah. Super random, but since we're talking about Andre Drummond and we talked about beer earlier, I saw a GQ story where it said that, well, it had 2 interesting nuggets. The first being that to improve his free throw technique, he was using virtual reality, which I think is super interesting. And then the second thing was that during this past summer, summer 2019, his diet included 1 beer a day.
That's it?
Apparently,
he just had 1 beer a day.
Yeah, apparently he would have a brew a day because he needed to up his intake. I feel like he could have gotten it. I feel like he could have gotten a better source than beer, but hey, to each their own.
Now that just puts a bunch of questions, like what type of beer was it? Like an IPA? Was it like a light beer? Like what is Andre Drummond's beer?
All I'm seeing is a frosty summer brew on this GQ story.
All right, good for him.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, those 6 guys are like the all-stars in this draft, and then you have a little bit of a drop-off. But with 7, once again, so for the 3rd time, I'm taking the original pick. So at 7, I'm taking Harrison Barnes, who in the actual draft went 7th to the Warriors.
Yeah, no complaints here. People, I think, sleep on how big of a deal Harrison Barnes was before coming into the league. Like he was, I think, one of the top high school prospects. He was really like the best player from the UNC team. And I feel like a lot of people clown him for his NBA Finals performance when I think the Warriors lost to the Cavs because he was basically 0 there. But he's put a pretty solid career, and he's found. Again, like maybe if he stayed on the Warriors would be different, but I think he's found a pretty good spot for him as a very, very decent plus NBA player for his career.
Yeah. I'd agree with you. I think he came in with a lot of hype and heading into UNC, and he didn't quite live up to that, but it's not like he was like bad at UNC. And on top of that, it's not like he's been bad in the NBA. He's not a superstar. He's actually a really on top. This is totally unrelated to his basketball, to his actual basketball career. But he's a super nice guy. He actually used to like interact with fans a lot on like Twitter or Facebook, and so he's actually like I've actually had a little back and forth with him, and he's always struck me as a guy who's like very team first and whatnot. So I think he's the kind of guy where you put him anywhere and he'll be a pro.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think he played in this was like early in the stay at home, like NBA season suspended. They had like a 2K tournament
Yeah,
with the players, and Harrison Barnes was garbage. Like I think he just got
yeah, he
blown
did.
out. Like
He
it
did.
was like, oh, thanks for playing. Like it's like one of those types of situations where like, yeah, I play like 2K, and then you like get on and play with someone who actually legitimately plays like very frequently, and you're like, oh, I don't play 2K, I guess. Like,
Yeah, I actually forgot about that. He got blown out by like 30.
yeah,
Yeah.
but nice guy though, nice guy.
Yeah, no, for sure a good guy.
Yeah.
And but yeah, moving on. I'm curious who you got at 8.
So this would have been Toronto's pick,
T
right?
dot. Yep,
Yep.
T dot.
So again, like it's really interesting, and we'll probably talk about this, but everyone from here on out has changed teams at least once in their career. So it really puts into perspective of sometimes it's really a situation, and some of these players, like once they got traded, they found a better situation. And this might become a surprise, but I'm going with Will Barton as my number 8 pick here.
Okay.
I think he's come on late. I think he had a kind of a rocky start in terms of his beginning. He played in Portland for a little bit. I think he showed flashes and then went to Denver, and then obviously with the big amounts of depth they had as a team. But I think he's found a pretty solid spot now as a great secondary playmaker, a spark plug off the bench if you want him, but also he's now inserted into the starting lineup. I really like his his all around game in terms of like he can score, but he can also distribute. So that's where I'm going with my number 8 pick.
Okay. Um, that's a fine pick. I don't have any objection to that. I had him a little bit lower, but he was definitely in this ballpark. He's an exciting guy to watch too.
Yeah, man, he's got a great nickname like Trill Barton. Like Basketball Reference calls him the People's Champ. So don't know how he ended up there,
Really?
but yeah, the
Really?
People's Champ.
That was Nolan Smith's nickname
Well, I guess
too.
Will
Yeah.
Barton has taken it from him. He's now, Nolan Smith was the People's Champ, but Will Barton is the true People's Champ now.
I suppose. I mean, yeah, and I mean another thing with Will Barton is he's been on some good teams too, like the 14 Blazers, and then obviously like the current iteration of the Nuggets. He's been like a quality contributor, and he's those teams have been pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone from here on out is, very. You're talking about very complimentary players. He players that could probably swing a game like as an outburst, like one time, but you don't need to depend them all the time to deliver every single night. So these are kind of the players, I guess, from this 8 onward to 14. That's the range that I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess at number what is it 9? This okay, at number 9, I think I'd take Jay Crowder. He's another guy, kind of like you alluded to. He was like in a situation, and then he moved teams, and then ended up in a better situation. But I will say the shooting percentages aren't exactly in his favor, but he's a guy who I always feel like he in these crunch time or kind of high stakes moments, not that he necessarily comes through, but I feel like he's a guy that you can trust to have out there. And obviously, he's a solid two-way player. He's played in a lot of high leverage games, and um, he's a decent three-point shooter depending on the year that you get him in. But it always just seems like whenever he comes to a team, that team gets better for the most part.
Yeah, it really puts into question. He's played for what? He started out in Dallas, went to Boston.
Boston,
Has some pretty
Cleveland,
decent, really decent seasons in Boston, Cleveland,
Utah,
Utah, Memphis,
then
and now
Memphis, and
he's
then now
landing.
Miami.
Yeah, now he's in Miami. So really strange how he seems to be bouncing around different teams. But I completely agree with you. He's definitely a guy that he's in that category of like, if you're playing crunch time, like this guy needs to be on the floor. Like he should be in your closing lineup because he's gonna make the right play. He's gonna play tough, and gut out wins for you. So I no complaints here in terms of your pick. And shout out to Marquette because they come out with some tough dudes. Like I don't know who was the head coach because we talked about Jimmy Butler last year.
Buzz Williams.
Buzz Williams, yeah.
He and look at him and Jimmy reunited.
Oh, they're reunited?
In Miami.
I thought he went. Oh, he's an assistant in Miami? I thought Buzz Williams went to a different
Oh no, I meant Jimmy and Jay Crowder.
Oh, Jay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
And on top of that, obviously the greatest Heat player of all time is Dwayne Wade, who's also a Marquette guy. Just an interesting
something in the water, man. Something in the water in Marquette.
I guess on that note, we should all be very, very cautious if Pat Riley takes or somehow ends up with Marcus Howard.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know, man. Tyler Heroes, come for your spot.
Anyhow, moving on to pick 10. So this was also with a New Orleans pick. So who are you taking?
Yeah, here crossing off a bunch of guys. And again, this is kind of in a pool, but for me, I like Evan Fournier here. He's a very solid vet. For some reason, his nickname here is Don't Ghoul, because I guess really people don't know about Evan Fournier. I feel like this is something about Orlando. Just they always seem to have very solid players that just kind of come through, but you just completely forget about the Orlando Magic's basketball team. Like they have, if you look at their roster, they have like a solid bunch of very good players. Maybe the sum doesn't end up being greater than the whole, but Evan Fournier, great scoring punch, either as a sixth man, now he's a starter, dependable for at least 15, 16 points a game. Just competent player. Definitely wouldn't be a minus if he was on the floor.
Yeah. I had him at 10. So I'm with you, and you definitely bring up an interesting point. Like every time I look at the Magic roster, I'm like, yo, these guys are all interesting. I feel like I've perceived these guys to be interesting, young, promising pieces. But then when you combine them all together, it's like what? They're like a 7 seed.
I think they need just one superstar. I think they just need to hit on one draft pick or one trade where they just get a superstar guy. Although they have had superstars in the past, they just all seem to kind of leave. Dwight Howard. You could even talk about Victor Oladipo if he really kind of developed his game in Orlando, he would have been a lead dog here. But yeah, looking at the team, just clicking on their current roster, DJ Augustine, good player. Fournier, good player. Aaron Gordon, solid. Jonathan Isaac, super slept on. Vucevic, which I had high in my last draft. So just all a bunch of guys that I'm good player, but why does this team suck so much? Well, they don't suck, but they're always perpetually in the number 7, 8.
That's their ceiling, which is not where you want to be. But yeah.
But shout out to them. They took a game off of Toronto last year, which I thought I watched it and I was like, whoa,
They did. Yeah. I agree with you about Fournier. No issue there. With 11, which is the Blazers, where they originally took Myers Leonard, I'm gonna take JaMychal Green, who actually went undrafted in this draft. So the reason I take him is because first and foremost, he's a solid two-way player, and he's always been, whether regular season or playoffs, he's always been pretty efficient. He always shoots above 45% from the field, and then 35, 36% from three. Not a liability at the free throw line. So I think he's just a complementary and versatile wing who can play power forward, small forward. You can just kind of plug and play, and he'll contribute.
Wow, that's a big surprise because he wasn't even on my board. I don't even think he made the cut.
Did you know he was in the draft?
Didn't even know he was in the draft. But I guess he's a solid player now. I think the knock on him is like he's not really a starter. I want to insert him into a starting
Sure,
lineup.
sure.
I think he's come on late in his career, boosted by kind of his potential as a like a stretch four who could shoot threes at a competent clip. But it's a bit in terms of his development. He came on a little bit late, so I could see kind of why he's trending upward in this redraft.
Sure.
Okay. So this is we're moving on to
12. It's the Rockets pick.
It's a Rockets pick. Surprisingly, just based on my board again, like how it all shook out, like I'm going with the pick that they actually had, which really curious trying to see how he would have ended up in Houston. But Jeremy Lamb is my pick, number 12 here for the Rockets. A little side note story about Jeremy Lamb. I think one of the key reasons why he was in that package and kind of swung in that Harden trade was he put up a fantastic summer league performance. Like he was putting up some solid numbers where he was like dropping hella points, making a lot of plays, big playmaker in summer league. And I think that was one of the I suspect, again, fan theory here, that this was one of the reasons that they swung the trade, because I think OKC was looking to get younger. They saw Jeremy Lamb as like basically Harden light, just based on the skill set here. But I think he's put up a pretty solid, career. I think he came on pretty strong this year before he got injured. So pretty competent NBA player. Kind of curious to see maybe if he had developed somewhere outside of OKC and Charlotte, maybe you put him in like a very competent structure, either in like, think about putting him in Miami, think about, how would he have developed if he played in San Antonio, things like that, kind of a big what if for his career.
Yeah, can't argue with the pick here. Yeah, I actually remember him like doing really well in summer league, and you combine that with how good he was at UConn. I think that his stock was definitely really high, like heading into like fresh off of being drafted and heading into that Harden trade. So I actually do I faintly remember that. I was not that I ever expected you to do this, but given that last week in the 2011 redraft, you said you wanted a guy who was very, I guess, Rockets-y, like a guy who, who you could see being like a Daryl Morey type player. And I honestly was curious to see if you might swing for the fences and go for John Jenkins, who is he's out of the league at this point, but back when he was in college, at least he was a 3-point sharpshooter. And I remember he always had a really clean looking form, but it just didn't work out for him in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of these like 3-point shooting type of players, and it's really hard to kind of track how they translate. I remember a couple seasons ago, I was like super high on this one player, Andrew Goldlock, for the Lakers. Like I was looking him up, I was like, this guy is like one of the top 3-point shooters in all of NCAA like history. Like, and then he played a couple games, but just never really shook out from that. It's really interesting how you mentioned John Jenkins, because I think there was like a reaction video from like Hawks fans when they drafted John Jenkins, and they were just pissed. Like they're like, who in the world is this guy? Like I got to pull up the draft reaction. I might send that to you later, but really curious how that you think that was a good fit. And I can see it, but I think shooting is kind of, I know we put it at a premium now, but I feel like finding undrafted players that are sharpshooters. One example could be like, if you remember Troy Daniels. I mean, he still plays in the league, but he got his start in with the Rockets, and I remember Houston, I was like, I remember watching. I was like, this guy can shoot. Like he's not afraid. He'll take shots and make them. So I'm glad to see him have a decent career. But John Jenkins, Troy Daniels, people like that, I think are pretty easy to come by. Whereas I feel like going with Jeremy Lamb, he brings a bit more of the playmaking, size, plays defense, things like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And with the like the shooting specialists, you never know which. Like you said, it's really hard to assess. Like John Jenkins didn't really find much success in the league, and he's not in the league anymore. But then you look at a guy like Duncan Robinson, where literally all he brings to the table is shooting, but he's like really good at it. And so some of it's situational, obviously, but yeah, it's like I agree with you. It's definitely hard to assess, like, is this guy really, like, as a quote unquote, you know, like a specialist? Is he really going to translate in the NBA? Which is why, like you said, taking a guy like Jeremy Lamb, where he can do some other stuff at a decent clip, that makes him kind of a safer pick, combined with the fact that he's like competent from three.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So I'm torn here at 13, with the Phoenix Suns pick, because I'm gonna be honest. I'm considering Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, because I feel like he was literally in like the worst possible situation when it comes to the organization and like luck with health. And I just feel like he was such a versatile defender and a guy who played with very high motor. But I think I'm gonna go with, this is tough, because I feel like there's a lot of options where whatever option you take, there's gonna be some holes. There's gonna be some flaws that you can poke at. But I think I'm gonna go with Terrence Ross.
Yep, solid pick. He was the next guy on my board.
Yeah, and so like I said, I was thinking long and hard about like Bazemore and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and then obviously Terrence Ross. The thing I guess that pushes Terrence Ross over the top is probably just that Terrence Ross, first and foremost, he's like fairly durable. Like with the exception of the 2017-18 season, he's played basically like 73 plus games every year. He's been on some good teams. Obviously, he was on the Toronto team in 2016 that went to the conference finals, and he's like competent on offense to where he's gonna get you like 9, 10, 11 points a game. You probably don't want him being like your go-to guy, like being scoring like 15, 16 points a game, but he's decent enough offensively, and he's obviously very athletic, winning the dunk contest, but he's also like fine on defense. Wouldn't call him a specialist, or wouldn't say he's special or anything, but he's fine. And his shooting percentages check out, with the exception of his field goal, with the exception of like in the playoffs. But some of that is kind of matte because he was on those Toronto teams that kept getting smoked by Cleveland, and then he was on the Orlando team last year that got smacked by Toronto, ironically.
Yeah, I mean, classic example of a popcorn player.
Yeah, he has a 50-point game, right?
Yeah, he dropped a 50 burger like on the Clippers, and this was like a pretty decent Clippers team. I think this was
That was Lob City. That was Lob City.
Yeah, he put a 51 pointer against a pretty decent Clippers team that I'm looking at the box score. They had Blake Griffin playing, DeAndre Jordan. I don't see Chris Paul here, so maybe he was injured, or this was before, but this is 2014, so I think he might have just been injured. But he put up some big buckets, and I think he had a duel against Jamal Crawford, because the top scorer in the Clippers was Crawford. So
yeah, he's definitely a heat check guy.
Oh yeah, for sure. High confidence guy. When he's feeling it, and that's why I put him on my board, and just under Jeremy Lamb as my number 12 best player. So yeah.
Yeah, and real quick point, I really feel like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, had he landed in a better situation, would have been a lot better. And then Kent Bazemore, I was thinking about Kent Bazemore, because he got a max, and the cliche is, oh, he's your prototypical 3-and-D wing. So what's crazy about Kent Bazemore is I look at his regular season stats, and they're like fine, but he's like decent from three, decent, okay from the field, and like fine from the free throw line, and he's a good defender. But then in the playoffs, he just not falls off a cliff, but his percentages are just a lot worse. So that was what kind of made me say I couldn't pick Kent Bazemore over Terrence Ross.
Yeah, I actually it's really funny, because I think I have the last pick here, number 14, right?
Yep.
I had Kent Bazemore. Shout out to ODU, Old Dominion.
Yeah,
that's where he went to college. And yeah, I think he's a classic 3-and-D player, very solid guy, competent player on your team, very complimentary piece. Would have loved to see him stay on Portland, because I think Portland would have definitely used him now that they're going back to the bubble. But I think he's a very competent player for Sacramento. But he had some really decent years in Atlanta.
Yep.
I think he found a very solid spot there. He started out in Golden State, where he kind of developed, learned under a bunch of great players and a great system, and I think that's really carried him over since then.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you think that his dip in the playoffs, do you think that's a function of just going against LeBron so many times, or?
Yeah, that is probably against LeBron.
So? You think so?
I think if you looked at everyone's statistics for the Hawks and the playoffs, like there's that brief kind of period, 3 or 4 year period where they had to go against LeBron, and that's why we call him like LeBronto. Like he just will come through and just devastate everyone. Like I think that's probably a big reason why we gave minuses to a bunch of Eastern Conference players from the mid 2015, 14 through basically since like LeBron's Heat to LeBron's Cavs. Everyone took kind of a dip in terms of reputation because they would just get swept by LeBron's team. If Toronto did win the championship last season, I think he would have that mark against Kyle Lowry.
I agree.
Have that mark against DeMar DeRozan, some of the Hawk players like Millsap, Horford, all those guys, would have minuses because of playoff poor performances against a very, very good player.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I don't know, like in 2017 when the Hawks played the Wizards, he also wasn't like terrible, but he wasn't great. And some of that, I will say, some of that is because Budenholzer has always had a little more success in the regular season, getting the most out of his guys, because he kind of doesn't really change the game plan too much in the playoffs. But I don't know. It's just not to say that Bazemore's a bad player, because he got a max, so but I don't know. There's just something that didn't sit well with me with the fact that he's notably worse come playoff time. But
yeah, do you want to jump into, or do you want to kind of do a quick recap of the picks so far?
Yeah,
we finished off the 14.
Yeah, so we go AD, Dame, Beal at 3, Middleton at 4, Draymond at 5, 6 was Drummond, Harrison Barnes still going 7, and then 8th you went with Will Barton. 9 I went with Jay Crowder. 10 you went with Evan Fournier. At 11 I went with JaMychal Green, and then you went with Jeremy Lamb at 12, which was the original pick. And then 13 I went with Terrence Ross. And then 14, you just went with Kent Bazemore. So we got 2 undrafted guys going in the lottery.
Yeah, shout out to them. But I think this draft pick, you really think about it, from basically, we can comfortably say that top 6 picks were, that's one tier, and then everything else kind of falls after that. Big draft for wing players, like your shooting guard, small forward. I know you put JaMychal Green in there, but if you take that out, everyone from 7 through 14 were basically competent defensive wing players. So pretty decent draft for that.
Yeah, and not a great draft for the big men after essentially big men whose initials were not AD. Because Thomas Robinson, Myers Leonard, who's still in the league, but he's not like a lottery pick level. John Henson, who's still in the league, but has been just so. Tyler Zeller, who similar story. Andrew Nicholson, Jared Sellinger, who's out of the league, and so forth.
Terrence Jones, I had a soft spot for Terrence Jones.
He had moments on the Rockets.
Yeah, he was legit. Terrible shooting for him, but hypothetically, he was 3-and-D player. Want to give a quick shout out to a player. I'm not sure if you remember him, Royce White.
Yes, dude, of course.
I was super big on this player coming out of college because he seemed like he was basically a unicorn. He was had everything in terms of, great size, playmaking, just all around. Like, I would call him probably beefed up James Johnson, as in just a great player. And I was super excited because he was just killing it in the, back then it was the D League, now it's the G League. But it then kind of really highlights the mental aspect of the game. I think he had a bunch of kind of mental issues. I think he had a fear of like flying on planes. He had a fear of flying,
which is tough.
Which is tough because it really puts it into question, and a bunch of people and fans might overlook kind of the mental aspect of being an NBA player. It's, this is your job. Like, you're expected to go out there and play. There's a lot of scrutiny involved. If you're not performing and you kind of wear out your welcome on teams, yeah, you kind of get the heat from the organization and even more from the fans. I think it's even easier for fans to start criticizing players because you could just go on their Instagram and just start talking shit and on messaging boards and stuff. So just want to take a quick moment to talk about Royce Wright and say what could have been, but unfortunately it wasn't.
Yeah, I liked him. Like you said, he truly was a unicorn. He ended up playing 3 games in the NBA and did not record a single statistic in any department. So he pulled off a $3 trillion for his career, which at the end of the day, he played in 3 NBA games. So who am I to crap on him? But just found that. Oh wait, no, sorry. He averaged 3 minutes a game, so he played 9 NBA minutes over 3 games, but he didn't record a single statistic. He probably attempted a shot or something, but
yeah, I think he attempted a shot.
Okay, but, then that's technically not a trillion according to Mark Titus, but still, yeah, he was a guy that like just wonder like what if, because he was. I've never quite seen a player like him. Yeah, like you said, truly kind of was a unicorn, but. I remember watching the Grantland documentary about him. It was like a short about him. I was talking about guys that didn't quite work out. I wanted to give a shout out to Tony Roten, who I've texted you about this guy. I watched him play in Jamal Crawford's summer league last year, and this dude was looking like James Harden, like lefty, jacking up threes and like hitting them at a decent clip, like athletic, throwing like sick lobs and alley-oops, but he just didn't work out in the NBA. And ironically, the thing that he couldn't do in the NBA was like shoot it well, like from 3. And yet, ironically, when I saw him play against like college or like overseas guys, he was like absolutely just bombing away threes and hitting them like crazy. So
yeah, shout out to him. I think I'm looking at his stats. He was averaging close to 17 points a game. Maybe I'm reading this wrong on his.
Oh yeah, 17 a game. 17 a game.
Oh yeah, he had a brief kind of bright spot in terms of seasoning playing for Philadelphia. Speaking of other kind of like near misses here, I again had NKG on my board, but surprisingly, my number 14 pick, if everything kind of cleared out, I had a Dion Waiters sighting on
Dion. Yeah.
Yeah, like. We might give him a lot of a hard time, give him a lot of crap for being a number 4th pick, but he was a great scorer, like high confidence guy. And I think you put him in the right situation, he would have. Again, not sure how many right situations there are out there, but I still think he was a competent NBA player and worthy enough to get drafted in the top 14. So I had him as my final pick as citing for Dion Waiters Island.
Yeah. Real quick point on Tony Roten. He's the only player he's the only player in NBA history where his first career start he had a triple double. But as for Dion Waiters, I agree with you. I think Dion Waiters is the ultimate. He is like the ultimate example of if things are going well, I look great, and if things are not going well, I am like your biggest nightmare.
Yeah, exactly, right. Exactly. It's like, oh no, like
Dion's unhappy.
It's like the same guy as I remember watching Lou Williams play for the Rockets, and you could tell immediately if he was gonna have a good game or not. If he made his first bucket, it was like, all right, he's solid. He's gonna be a good player. But he misses his first bucket. I swear, it was like the guy was cold. So very hot and cold type players. Players that are exciting, but also just terrifying to watch if you're a fan of the team, because you're just like, I don't know which one I'm gonna get today.
Yeah, and I guess I have one more. Like, I wish it had worked out for this guy, or a guy that I thought was going to be good, and it just never quite figured it out. Perry Jones III was one of the most like unique and like versatile players I saw when he was at Baylor. He was this like 6'11" dude who had like shooting guard skills, a little like Tracy McGrady-esque, and just never quite worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I also remember Perry Jones. I think he did end up playing a little bit in the league, but just never kind of brought up to his full-time potential here. He played a couple seasons here and there, but yeah, I remember he was a stud coming out of Baylor. Like, thought he was a true, NBA talent. But it really goes to show kind of you see what you see in the box score, you see what you see in the game tape, but at the end of the day, there's so many different factors that translate to playing in the league that you just can't control for sometimes.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts?
I guess a couple guys that I had listed as like potentially could go out. We already talked about MKG, talked about John Henson briefly, Terrence Jones. A guy that I think came on late, Thomas Satoransky.
Yeah, I had him in the honorable mention.
Like, I think Washington. This is probably a homer pick since I've seen him on the Wizards and now he's on the Bulls. Like, I think he's a competent starter. I think he has potential to kind of stay in the league for a couple of years because he just does a bit of everything. Not the greatest athlete, but super competent to be a sixth man, be a complementary player. And then the final guy was Austin Rivers. I think
he's still around.
He's still around. I think he was built to be kind of a league guy when he got drafted. He got drafted top 10, but I think he's came through and really found kind of his niche in terms of like just a pretty good guard off the bench, competent enough to lead a second unit, plays pretty tough defense, knows where to go. Just I think the knocks on him is his shooting. And his one quiet thing that I've noticed since watching him a lot, he's very poor at finishing. Like, yeah. He'll get the first step, he'll get past the defender, and then when he gets around the hoop, I don't know if it's like just kind of the spin or the touch that he has, but it always seems like he'll bounce off the backboard, dribble on the rim, and then just kind of fall off, and then he's gonna like put his hands up like what happened, and I'm also putting my hands up like what happened, like that looked like $1 million move, but a $0 finish here. So shout out to him. But those are a couple guys that I had in my near miss. If this was a weaker draft, they would probably get in.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, Austin Rivers, he's at least a pro. Like, you can play him in a rotation on a playoff team. Yeah, and I actually really like that line. What is it? $1 million move, $0 finish.
Yeah, because you see a bunch of these players like fantastic dribbles. Like, you could definitely make a YouTube compilation of crazy shots, crazy moves where someone did a crossover, someone fell, and then they shot it, and it's like, oh, it didn't go in. Like, yeah.
You know what? That's a great idea. I might have to follow up and do some research on that.
Yeah, it's really great because if they actually made the bucket, like this would probably go on SportsCenter top 10. But it's like, no, you unfortunately didn't put the basketball through the hoop, so therefore everything that you did before then just does not count. We're invalidating everything.
Yeah. But anyhow, we've been talking for about an hour, so I think that's a good place to stop. To the listeners, I want to thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on whatever medium you're listening to, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. And once again, thanks for joining me, Jason.
Yep, appreciate it.